Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was sent to another realm by a goddess. To save an entire world from a madman, one goddess has given the Kages a means to send Naruto to another realm. Will Naruto be able to discover Kushina's divine identity, and can he survive the challenges of being her son? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 9. Naruto stood with Beckendorf in the middle of the main attack force in his shinobi battle armor. He knew that he could have been perfectly fine in one of the infiltration teams or handling the defense. However, Naruto had asked for this position because he wanted the other team to focus on him. Most of the Ares' cabin would want a crack at him to get back at their uncle for wrecking their cabin. Almost all of them were cool with Naruto except for a few older hotheads, but it was the principle of the thing. Plus, he figured that many of Athena's and Apollo's children would also want a crack at him to test out the new guy. That was why Naruto wore his celestial bronze-forged shinobi armor. Its distinct design would focus even more attention on him. Beckendorf looked at the assembled attack force with determination. He knew that his team could win even though traditional thinking said they were most likely going to lose. As soon as Chiron blew his horn to start the game, Beckendorf hollered out, "Alright, Red Team Assault Squad, move out." As the 36 half-bloods jogged to the creek, Beckendorf turned to look at Naruto. He then grinned and said, "Let them know we're coming, Naruto." A grin appeared on the shinobi's face as he brought his hands behind his back out of view, and rapidly preformed 4 hand signs to a jutsu he had been eager to try out. Naruto tilted his head back without breaking his stride, and let loose a blood-curdling howl that echoed throughout the forest. Even though everyone on Red Team had been briefed on this, almost everyone on the assault squad froze for a second in fear. Not that anyone could blame them, as Naruto's wolf howl combined with the yawn of Bishamonten jutsu made it sound like the whole forest was infested with rabid hellhounds. The yawn of Bishamonten was an old jutsu that had fallen out of favor in the elemental nations when combat shifted primarily to shinobi-on-shinobi conflicts. The jutsu amplified a person's voice and laced it with killing intent. It was very useful for breaking enemy morale and causing confusion among levy armies and samurai. Not so much for ninjas except for teachers to quiet down rowdy students. Thankfully, Beckendorf hadn't flinched at Naruto's howl and called out, "Come on everyone and get across the creek." I'm sure half of the blue team is still in shock and the other half is trying to reorganize for a hellhound attack they probably think is on the way. Do you want to waste this opening that Naruto got for us? With his team rallied, Beckendorf quickly walked through the creek and onto the other side. Naruto jumped over the creek and then stood guard as everyone else crossed it. Soon enough, the red team had its first encounter with the blue team. It was just 3 border patrolmen from the Athena cabin, who had pulled back to prepare for a monster attack. They were quickly taken out by 3 of Hermes' children using slings and knockout pellets supplied by Naruto. The 2 youngest campers on the assault squad stayed behind for a little bit to secure the 3 members of blue team that had just been sent to Morpheus. That was their task on the team, securing fallen enemies, so that they couldn't re-enter combat. The assault squad was able to take out 6 more members of the blue team in 2 quick strikes following the same pattern as the first 3. In all honesty, Naruto and Beckendorf were surprised that they were able to catch 9 enemy teammates without getting stuck in a pitched battle. Sure, they had expected some disarray from Naruto's attack, but not this much. Fortunately for their nerves, they soon came upon the main group of the blue team attackers, which had reorganized itself in a defensive formation. There was a brief second of confusion and disbelief on the part of the blue team when they saw the red team's assault squad. Realization quickly hit them that the hellhounds they had been preparing for weren't real. Many of Athena's children wondered how the red team had simulated a hellhound hull, but they knew that now wasn't the time to think about it. Naruto quickly demonstrated his prowess in warfare once the battle started. He was like a demented gopher on coffee as he jumped between blue team members and off of various trees in his assault. Everyone knew that he was in extremely good physical condition, but no one had expected such an off-the-wall unorthodox fighting style. How could the blue team prepare a defense against him when the shinobi half-blood would attack at previously unknown openings? Annabeth was knocked out in the first minute as Naruto jumped over her head, kicked her in the back, and then used her as springboard for his next attack. The other members of the red team weren't about to just let Naruto win the day for them by himself. They all put pressure on the disorganized blue team, knocking more and more opponents out of the fight. Occasionally, one of the red team would be knocked out by the blue team. But, for every member of the red team taken down, the red team lost 3. The senior members of the Ares and Athena cabins tried to rally the blue team. Unfortunately for the blue team, the senior members of the two cabins had different ideas of what should be done, leading to confusion. This confusion only helped the red team, which now moved under Beckendorf's orders to split the blue team in 2. With the blue team now broken and having less team members still active, a rout was inevitable. The only thing that stopped the blue team from breaking any semblance of defense and running was Chiron's horn cutting through the battle. The call on the horn signified that the red team had successfully retrieved the blue team's flag. Up in Alaska, SKLUP watched the red team's victory through the smoke of a campfire with a smirk on his face. Part of the coyote spirit wished he could be on Olympus to see the looks on the deities' faces over this upset victory. The only reason he wasn't on Olympus was security was still heightened after his last prank. You'd think that the goddess of sluts would be a little more receptive of having her temple decked out as a sleazy bordello. After all, Aphrodite had slept with every guy on that mountain at least once. At least SKLUP had Hermes and Apollo as fall guys for the Olympians to blame that prank on. However, the mountain's internal security would be on alert for the next couple of months, and SKLUP really didn't feel like making enough mist to make any of the deities forget him if they were to catch him on the mountain. Naruto's victory made SKLUP extremely proud of his idiotic student. The boy had properly used everyone's abilities in the mock battle. That was something that the Half-Bloods hadn't done since Camp Half-Blood 12 was founded in England 2 centuries ago. Furthermore, Naruto had played a decisive role in the battle without giving away his jutsu abilities. That would be vital in SKLUP's bid to the Council of Regents to let him teach the boy more about the true reality of the Western mythical realm. It was also great to see that Naruto wasn't trying to claim the credit he deserved for being such a critical part of the red team's success. SKLUP's private viewing ended when Iktomi crawled into the clearing. The spider spirit quickly changed from his animal form to human form. SKLUP looked at his old prankster buddy with a grin that quickly turned to a frown. Iktomi's face was serious and his eyes lacked the usual luster that they had when he usually visited SKLUP. The coyote spirit blew out the fire, ending the smoke signal viewer, and got up to walk over to his old friend. In a serious tone, SKLUP asked, "What is wrong, brother?" Iktomi sighed and replied, "That cursed proto-Roman bitch sent yet another of her children to find that blasted statue of hers." His voice was now filled with self-loathing and rage as he started to rant. "I'm getting sick and tired of having to kill every kid she sends to try and reclaim her status as a war goddess among the corrupted. I'm telling you, SKLUP, that we should have expunged her from existence when she was born, like those other divine bastards of Zeus who showed the taint. I mean, the taint was practically radiating from her at birth, so the council should have been able to see the problems we could face with her running around." This was an old issue with Iktomi, and SKLUP repressed a groan as he pulled out a beer for his fellow spirit. When Iktomi grabbed the beer, SKLUP spoke up. "Tekalote messed up then, no doubt about it. But to be fair, Athena did spring from her father's head, so it would have been impossible to tell what part of those vile energies was her taint and what part was the corruption within her father. The fact that she sprang from Zeus's head as an adult and in the middle of the Olympian Council would have made it impossible to expunge her, even if Tekalote had immediately discovered that she was tainted instead of carrying the corruption like her siblings. Remember that when Tekalote did realize his mistake, he voluntarily exiled himself to keep her taint in check by becoming her symbol. It was rather darkly humorous that the spirit of death, ill omens, and black magic was regarded by the Olympian subsection of the West as a symbol of wisdom. Tears formed in Iktomi's eyes as he futilely fought to keep from crying. I can't keep doing this, Elip. I really can't. Why does she always have to send the best and brightest after that blasted statue? So much potential wasted, and I'm the one who has to ensure that the damn thing isn't found. What's worse is that I have to succeed every damn time, or the beast slumbering within her will break loose. We should have gotten the Romans to force her to fade like they did to Selene and Helios. Why did the tainted bitch live while two nearly uncorrupted deities die? Before Elip could try and comfort Iktomi further, Kokol flew down to the clearing like the raven spirit had been shot out of a cannon. Kokol had a wild look in his eye as he practically pounced on Coyote Spirit. Did your student have anything to do with it? Kokol continued to repeat the question over and over while shaking the spirit so hard that he imitated a bobblehead doll. Finally, Elip was able to break Kokol's grip and knock the bird on his butt. By the Great Spirit, pull yourself together. What is this that has you so hyped up? Kokol took a deep breath to calm down and then spoke with barely contained excitement. Hera no longer carries any corruption. Impossible. Iktomi shouted out in disbelief. No one has been free of corruption since the Abyss War started, ending the First Era. The four kings couldn't find a way to free the realms from the corruption that IT unleashed. Need I remind you that we all carry some of the corruption, and even our best efforts over the eons to purify ourselves has only resulted in keeping the corruption from growing? How could the Great Spirit's granddaughter achieve what we could not with a vastly more concentrated amount of corruption without even being aware of it? A chill ran down Elip's spine as he remembered a confusing passage from the Great Spirit's Codex that had baffled everyone for millennia. By this sign shall you know that the trials will be upon the West. A pure deity twice born to the lords of harvest shall give birth to a babe with mortal flesh and divine soul. Elip looked at his companions and explained, the transition prophecies are upon us as we've suspected. Hera has been born twice, once as her divine self and more recently a part of her was reborn as Kushina. She has somehow become purified of the corruption, and Naruto, as a demi-deity, would fit the description of a child with mortal flesh and divine soul if one interpreted it as an allusion to his mixed heritage. Kokol thought about it for a second and shook his head. That's a possibility, but I don't think that your idea is the correct interpretation of that passage. Half-bloods are usually described in the Codex as mortal flesh and divine blood. Why use the word soul in that particular passage if it is describing a half-blood? The phrase Lords of Harvest doesn't make much sense as we've only had one deity use the title, and he's still in 1,000 pieces. Also, you're cherry-picking from the Codex as the next passage in the Codex has no rational connection to what you've just said. Sun and moon struggle where forefathers' land meets forefathers for the right to shed innocence's blood. Apollo and Artemis may fight a lot, but they would never ever fight the right to kill someone, especially if that person was innocent of any wrongdoing. If anything, they'd be the first deities among the Olympians to defend an innocent. Iktomi cut in at that moment with an almost mad gleam in his eye. I don't give a damn about the Codex at the moment, and neither should you too. Our top priority should be on discovering how Hera removed the corruption within herself and finding a way to replicate it on all the deities. Don't you realize what this could mean? We'd no longer have to enforce the Latin protocols, and would no longer have to coax the deities from using their corrupted forms. The risk of the beast's awakening would no longer be upon us. There was a festive mood among most of the cabins in Camp Half-Blood as the red team was still giddy over its upset victory against the blue team. Even Mr. D was in a good mood over the game. His pleasure seemed to come more from the shock and disbelief of the Apollo, Athena, and Ares cabins over the fact that their sure win had been taken from them. It had been the most stacked game in the past century, and the underdog had scored an almost perfect victory. That was not something that any of the campers' prides would forgive quickly. The only unusual thing that happened during breakfast is that a dryad appeared from the forest and quickly walked to the head table. Usually, the Dryads did their own thing during mealtimes, since they didn't need to eat. The Dryad walked over to Mr. D and hurriedly passed a message to him. Naruto was one of the few campers who had noticed the Dryad's arrival, and he frowned. From his vantage point, the shinobi couldn't see the nymph's lips to read what she was saying. It had to be important given the serious look on Mr. D's face. For some reason, the god looked towards Naruto and muttered, "Figures." As the Dryad left to return to the woods, Mr. D stood up to address the campers. "All right, you brats, I have just been told of an announcement that you all will find rather important. The hunters along with Artemis are approaching camp, and are expected to be here in an hour or two." Demeter's oldest son blurted out, "Damn it. Who won the bet?" Several other older campers started clamoring to know who had won as well. Naruto and all of the campers under 16 were scratching their heads in confusion. What bet were the older campers talking about? For that matter, when was betting allowed in camp in the first place? Charlie Epps, the counselor for Cabin 6 and a prodigy even among his siblings, reached into his backpack where he kept his graduate research work and pulled out a small booklet. Naruto had a great deal of respect for Annabeth's oldest sibling still attending camp. The 17-year-old already had a bachelor's degree in mathematics, almost had a master's degree, and was on course to start his PhD almost a year before most campers left for college. Charlie quickly leafed through the booklet and said, "The pot of 200 drachmas goes to Gleason Hedge for correctly guessing when Artemis and her hunters would visit camp this year." Annabeth looked up at her big brother and asked in a demanding tone, "What is this bet, Charlie, and why did so many people think that the hunters would be coming to camp when it's been almost a decade since their last visit?" Naruto noted that Charlie glanced in his direction after being questioned by Annabeth. There was too much background noise for him to hope to hear what Annabeth asked, and his view was again blocked from being able to see her lips. Most likely she was asking about the bet, but that only added more confusion for Naruto. What in pervy uncle's name was his connection to this bet, as Charlie's glance suggested? The shinobi half-blood looked around at the various tables hoping to spot the key he needed to unravel this mystery. Unfortunately, most of the older campers were avoiding Naruto's gaze as if in shame. Only Aphrodite's children were willing to look at him, but the look in their eye made Naruto shift his gaze. They had the same gleam in their eyes that he always had whenever some instructor he despised was about to be pranked big time. One of the girls who was in clear view said to one of her friends, "This will be good to watch." Talk about amateur hour if ever there was one. Naruto couldn't see the girl's companion clear enough to read her response. What he had read just confused him. What did that camper mean by amateur hour? With breakfast finished, Naruto was supposed to go his arts and crafts session. However, he decided to bail on that in order to try and figure out what was going on. The young shinobi sat in front of his cabin and began writing out the facts that he could think of that could possibly relate to this situation. 1. Artemis had apparently placed him under her protection, which was very rare for her to do for a boy. 2. His mother's letter hinted that Artemis's protection was because she was risking some sort of trouble or penalty otherwise. 3. The fact that he was under Artemis's protection had sent up alarms among the half-bloods he knew back up north. 4th, although Naruto wasn't too sure on this one's relevance, one of his more frequent dreams was of a doe and a dove fighting, which suggested some sort of contention between Artemis and Aphrodite. On Naruto's notepad that fact was circled and had a question mark attached to it. It wasn't clear whether those dreams were revealing something relevant to his situation, or if they were just reminding him that those two goddesses did not get along. Fact number 5 was that Artemis and her hunters were coming to camp, which all the older campers had been suspecting. Finally, there was fact 6, the elder campers had apparently tied Artemis's arrival with him joining camp. When added up all together, these facts equaled. One might think that being the son of the goddess of marriage, Naruto would be more aware of relationships and potential romance. The simple fact of the matter is that marriage and romance had absolutely nothing to do with each other. One dealt with important bonds that were the cornerstone of civilization, and the other dealt with often fickle emotions. Things were better when marriage and romance aligned, which was why Hera and Aphrodite tried to coordinate their efforts in those fields. Not always to best of success as the high divorce rates were showing, but that was something that Hera blamed on Aphrodite and her love for love polygons. Bonds and commitment were at the heart of marriage, and Naruto had those concepts woven throughout his being. Anyone who knew him could testify to how seriously he held the bonds of friendship, which were the only bonds he had real experience with, and that his word was as solid as an oath to Styx. While Naruto was trying to figure out the link between him and Artemis, Chiron was making his usual rounds to catch the stragglers and the activity dodgers. He already had sent 3 of Hermes's kids back to swordsmanship practice. The old trainer could feel that things would be chaotic enough if his niece was coming to camp for her hunt. The last thing he needed was a prank war erupting. Chiron saw Naruto by his cabin, and was about to grab the boy's ear when he saw the notepad. Very quickly the old teacher realized that Naruto had no knowledge of Artemis' ancient wager with Aphrodite. The question on Chiron's mind was whether or not that was a good thing. After a second, Chiron politely coughed to get Naruto's attention. "Naruto, breakfast is over, and you need to go to arts and crafts." Naruto looked up at Chiron and said, "Can't I have a few minutes to try and solve this puzzle? All of the older campers are acting like there's some sort of connection between me and Lady Artemis which doesn't make any sense. I don't like be out of the loop when something involves me. Can you tell me what everyone is referring to if you know?" Chiron sighed and replied, "I know what you are asking to know, Naruto. However, I must ask you to rein in your curiosity. There could be serious negative consequences for many of you know too much too soon on this issue. Others in camp know what is in play because it's something we teach the older half-bloods, and they've all been sworn to not tell you or any of the younger campers at this time. You will be told what you need to know when the time is right, so don't worry. Now, you have a class to get to and I expect you to be there, Naruto." Artemis and her hunters walked towards the border of Camp Half-Blood. While the hunters had never been particularly happy going to camp, this time they had the aura of a funeral procession. Artemis and several of the hunters winced when they saw Talia's tree. Talia's rejection of the hunt hadn't been the first rejection even in this century. However, it had been the rudest rejection that anyone had given in a very long time. That being said, no one wanted a strong and brave young maiden's life cut so tragically short. For a split second Artemis wished she could trade places with her half-sister before banishing the thought. Without wasting any more time, the hunt crossed Camp Half-Blood's border and made its way to the big house. When they reached the big house, Artemis turned around to address her handmaidens. "Go to cabin 8 and make yourselves at home as we'll be staying here for a while. I will inform Chiron and Dionysus that the hunt will be staying here for a while." All of the hunters replied in a resigned tone, "Yes, milady." None of the hunters were happy to be at camp, especially given that they were going to be looking forward to staying there all summer long. In addition to the usual harassment that they had to put up from the more obnoxious campers, they'd have stand by as their lady was forced to court Hera's spawn. It burned them that Artemis was being forced to break her long-held and cherished oaths. The only thing that kept the hunters from being up in arms over Artemis being forced into marriage was the fact that she was doing it to protect them. If Artemis was willing to put up with this indignity and disgrace for their sakes, then the least they could do was be supportive of her. Artemis watched her hunters walk over to cabin 8 and waited for all of them to enter the cabin. If confronted, the goddess would no doubt say that she was watching to make sure none of her hunters were pranked as they settled in from a long journey. The truth was she wanted just a little more time before confronting a fellow Olympian about why she was here. Soon enough all of the hunters entered cabin 8 and Artemis was left with no more excuses to delay. She firmed up her nerves, opened the front door to the big house, and walked inside. Once inside, Artemis recoiled in disgust. Dionysus and the Council of Cloven Elders were all sitting around the poker table playing a game of cards and looking like stereotypical fat white trash trailer park losers. Was it really that hard to comprehend why she liked being a maiden goddess when most men fell to these kinds of standards? One of the satyrs was half drunk when he and the others looked up from their game to observe Artemis's arrival. The idiot was the first to speak up in a slurred manner. "Hey babe, I hear you're here for a husband. How about ditching the runt and going for a real dash?" The elder's sentence was cut off by Artemis whipping out her bow and shooting an arrow through the elder's head. The surviving two elder satyrs immediately bolted from the table and ran out of the house. One actually jumped through the nearby window, having deemed the glass safer for his health than Artemis's ire. Dionysus looked at the blood-covered playing cards in disgust. Another perfectly good deck wasted because of something involving the brats. He whirled around to face Artemis and demanded, "Why did you have to ruin a perfectly good game?" "I was winning in case you wanted to know." Artemis rolled her eyes and said, "I'd suggest that you choose less uncouth players for your next game so that I won't have to ruin your games when I need to put them in their place. My hunt has taken residence in Cabin 8 and will be staying in camp for the duration of the summer term. If you need me, I will be talking with Chiron. Also, I will be dining with my hunters instead of at the head table, so inform the nymphs on kitchen duty to make the necessary arrangements." Dionysus's face started to turn purple with rage. He quickly stood up and walked over to his half-sister and glared at her. "What the tatterus do you think you're doing, Artemis? In case it slipped your mind, Tinkerbell, you can't be here. No god or goddess is allowed to stay at Camp Half-Blood, since that is living with the half-blood brats, which is against the law. The only reason I'm stuck in this hellhole is because of Father." The camp director would have continued the rant except that Artemis pulled out a hunting knife and positioned it next to Dionysus's belly. Artemis hissed out in a deadly serious tone, "Shut up, or I swear I'll gut you like the pig you pretend to be. That law doesn't apply to me because I don't have half-blood children. I have my hunters, and since they are my handmaidens, I am allowed to be and stay wherever they are. They are staying at Camp Half-Blood for the summer, so I will be staying as well. I'm already under enough stress from the current situation as it is, so I don't need you aggravating it for me. Is that clear?" While Dionysus was the god of madness, he was not mad or insane himself. He realized that going against Artemis on this matter would not be good for his health. Dionysus quickly reined in his temper and said, "Fine, if you want your hunters to stay at camp they can. However, they will have to follow camp rules since you're enrolling them for the summer session. That means that Cabin 8 will have to do all camp activities, their share of the camp upkeep, and be under the camp's disciplinary rules. You'll also have to do something to help run this camp since no adult is allowed to live here without being part of the camp staff." A wince appeared on Artemis's face as she had forgotten that rule for Camp Half-Blood. She usually just viewed camp as a convenient recruiting ground and refuge for her hunt when things go too dangerous to have them out in the wild. It was only because of her need to get access to Naruto that she had reread the rulebook for the first time in 400 years. However, Artemis wasn't about to let the rules stop her plans. With a firm look in her eye, Artemis said, "That is acceptable, Dionysus. I'll inform Chiron that I will be taking over as the camp's archery instructor for the summer sessions. Now if you'll excuse me, I have other people in camp to see." Artemis then left the big house to let Chiron know about the new situation in camp. Dionysus sighed once Artemis was outside and muttered to himself, "I really hate my life right now. Just 87 years 10 months 13 days 6 hours and 21 minutes, until I am out of this damned madhouse." Chapter 10. Naruto and the 24 other students in the archery class walked out on the field, and everyone blinked their eyes in surprise. A 12-year-old auburn-haired girl wearing a silvery outfit was waiting for them instead of Chiron, or one of the senior members of the Apollo cabin who occasionally filled in for the old centaur. Annabeth spoke out in surprise, "Lady Artemis?" Artemis nodded her head and then spoke up, "I am glad to see that you remembered me, Annabeth." Artemis looked out at all of her students and rested her eyes on Naruto for a long moment before she continued to speak. "For my own reasons, my hunt, and I will be staying at Camp Half-Blood for the rest of the summer term. As such, I will be your new archery trainer for the summer term. You all will obey my instructions promptly and precisely. Failure to do so will result in you spending the rest of the day as a jackalope. Is that clear? Immediately all of the students started nodding their heads to show that they understood Artemis's instructions. None of them wanted to spend any time at all as a jackalope. For a brief second a small smile of satisfaction appeared on Artemis's face. She then had everyone line up at the range and begin shooting. After 5 volleys were fired, Artemis ordered everyone to stop and transformed her first jackalope. Her foolish nephew thought that would be better to fire the 6th shoot he had drawn instead of putting the arrow back in his quiver. While the new jackalope sprinted for the safety of his cabin, Artemis began to walk down the range critiquing everyone's shots. Despite what most of the guys thought, she did not mock them, she did not look down upon them, and she did not judge them harsher than she did the girls. Part of Artemis wanted to groan in frustration when she picked up those surface thoughts from her students. She was the goddess of maidens, not feminazis, for Olympus's sake. Somehow, people had taken her attacks on the disgusting scum who hurt young girls and turned it in their minds into a hatred for all men. Her normal attitude towards males was a guarded indifference. The hardest student for Artemis to deal with was Naruto. For a beginner his shoots were quite impressive with a close grouping. It was obvious to her that he had experience with ranged weapons in the past, most likely some sort of throwing knives given how his muscles instinctively moved. She didn't have any complaints with him as a student as he attentively listened to her corrections. What made teaching Naruto so hard for Artemis is that she had to fight the urge to turn into a deer and run away every second she was close to him. Between the fact that she had to get him as her husband and the fact that Naruto had knocked her out last time they were near each other, her instincts were in overdrive. However, the most nerve-wracking thing about Naruto for Artemis were his thoughts on her, or to be more precise, the lack of thoughts she picked up. That wasn't supposed to happen at all. Surface thoughts were something any deity could pick up from mortals or demigods. Demigod thoughts were more muted than those of a mortal thanks to the divine blood in their veins, but that was more like the buzzing of a fly compared to the cawing of a parrot. The muted symphony of thoughts was usually something Artemis, like all the other deities, ignored. After a few hundred years one will have heard the entire gambit of thoughts that people can have about you. Deities only needed to read a person's thoughts if they were looking for specific information, like Artemis had tried to do several years ago. This wasn't the case with Naruto. His surface thoughts weren't broadcasting at all. Gods and goddesses were not used to dealing with new things, and Artemis found her inability to read Naruto to be very nerve-wracking. It also made her task of getting Naruto harder, since many deities used the reading of a mortal's surface thoughts to help them win their conquests over. Artemis had always considered it to be rather crass of her relatives to do so. This was especially for her male relatives, because many of them liked to brag about how quickly they seduced their conquests. Tartarus, the only reason Artemis was considering using that tactic was because she couldn't fail her hunters by not catching Naruto. Finally, the class ended and Artemis was able to send them on their way. Part of her wanted to pull Naruto to the side and talk with him. She didn't do so because she was too uncomfortable with the idea of being alone with him now that she couldn't read him. Artemis knew that she wouldn't have any students for a while and decided to burn off some stress by running through the woods. While running, she didn't have to think about why she was at Camp Half-Blood or what the future might hold. She could simply be. Artemis's run ended when she heard a voice call out, "Have you cleared your head yet?" Artemis stopped mid-stride and whipped around into a defensive position. Her eyes quickly spotted someone lying against the tree trunk on a branch of a nearby tree. It took the maiden goddess a split second to recognize the figure, and her eyes narrowed in fury. She immediately hissed out, "Hera! What are you doing here?" Hera looked down at Artemis and dismissively said, "What? Can't a goddess pop in to check up on one of her less annoying nieces? Today is supposed to be your first official meeting with your future husband if you play your cards right after all. Part of me was curious to see if you would try and seduce Naruto today, or if you just save the tumbles and the mud for when your potential boyfriends are asleep. Without a second thought, Artemis leaped into the air and landed on a tree branch next to Hera. She then hissed out, "Are you trying to force me into that deal of yours? How did you mute Naruto's thoughts?" Genuine surprise appeared on Hera's face and she murmured, "Naruto's thoughts are mute?" Hera thought back to all the times she had been with Naruto, and her eye widened when she realized that she had never heard his surface thoughts like the other demigods she encountered. Naruto's thoughts were as open to her as any other half-blood, but that was because of the fragment of Kushina that was sealed into the seal with the Kyuubi. "Not sure how that happened, I'll definitely have to investigate it in my spare time." Hera shook her head and said, "I can look into that later." She then turned to Artemis and said, "The truth, Artemis, is that I came here to try and offer you some support. Like me, you're getting ready to experience parts of your domains that you never wanted to face." Artemis's eyes narrowed and she asked, "What do you mean by that?" The younger goddess watched as Hera's face gained a blank and foreboding expression to it. "As you know, we experience our domains as part of ruling over them. What we all tend to forget about is that we eventually have to experience all aspects of our domains. We can delay those aspects for an extremely long time even by immortal standards, but destiny has a way of catching up with us. I honestly wasn't aware of this until after Kushina was born when I went to the Fates about my situation then. They explained this to me and later advised me to have Naruto in part to bring your bet into play. It is the kinder of the two alternatives you're about to face." Fear chilled Artemis's spine and she whispered, "You don't mean?" She couldn't bring herself to say the other option, hoping that she had misheard. Hera frowned and said, "If you truly cannot bear to be with Naruto, and you are willing to forfeit your hunters, then I urge you to find a husband you can stand and have his child. If you do not, then the fates have assured me, you will be raped in the upcoming decades. Regardless of your wishes, your years as a maiden are numbered just as the years of my marriage are numbered." Hera let out a bitter chuckle and said, "I suppose this is how mortals feel when other deities decide to make sport of them." Before Artemis's thought could become depressed, Hera stood up and shockingly pulled the younger goddess into a tight embrace. Part of Artemis was shocked at Hera's actions. While the two goddesses were usually very amicable, they had never been very close. Another part of Artemis was thrilled at the warmth and closeness Hera was offering as means to drive out her terror at the recent news. For several minutes the two just stood together hugging each other. Eventually Hera ended the hug and said, "We both are facing challenges that we never wanted to face. Even if I had not created my avatar, I would have eventually been driven in spit to take a lover to make my husband feel the pain of adultery. Part of me still wants to believe that such a thing wouldn't happen, however, the fates were quite clear on that point. I will tell you this, that as my wedding present to you, even if you do not marry Naruto, I will allow you access to my sacred spring, so that you can regain your virginity once a year." As soon as Hera said that, she vanished, leaving Artemis alone in the woods. Zoe frowned as she looked at her dinner. The meal itself was good. In fact, the nymphs who prepared it had reserved the best cuts and selections for the Artemis cabin, as they usually did whenever the hunt visited Camp Half-Blood. Her frown was because the campers had finished their weekly Capture the Flag game a few hours ago, and Artemis had told them that they'd have to join in the next round of Capture the Flag. Unlike previous games, it wouldn't be hunter versus camper since the hunt was enrolled for the summer session, and thus considered to be campers as far as the rules went. The only reason Chiron hadn't required them to join this last round was because the hunt came in the middle of the week. The red team had won again, but the cheers were more muted than the team's last victory. A member of the Hephaestus cabin had gotten the flag from the blue team. Since a cabin couldn't have two flags, Beckendorf was required to hand over the second flag to the cabin that had contributed the most to the team's victory. Beckendorf had given the blue flag to Naruto despite of some protests from his siblings and from the Ares campers. The main reason his siblings complained was because they didn't want to fight against Naruto. Having to join in the stupid Capture the Flag game was only part of Zoe's foul mood. The other and deeper problem for her was how the red team won the game. They had used completely different tactics and formations than any she had ever seen. Usually, the campers used a small set of tactics that had been handed down to them from older sibling to younger sibling. Those tactics had thinned a great deal ever since the Great Separation, because the lost tactics had been created to deal with the Romans. The tactics and strategies that Naruto had so recently introduced into Camp Half-Blood were very unique. They also had no basis in usual half-blood tactics or in mortal tactics. Moreover, Zoe had seen something very disturbing when she had observed the game in order to find out more about Naruto. The battle doctrine Naruto was introducing to the campers was that of total war between demigods, and it was not his own. It was clear to her experienced eyes that Naruto had learned these strategies and battle formations from somewhere. There just wasn't the roughness of design in them to be an original creation. Zoe had seen plenty of points where the campers had been poor in executing Naruto's new battle doctrine, and there were other signs that Naruto hadn't tuned everything to the demigod's abilities exactly for the moment. However, everything Zoe did see was irrefutable evidence that Naruto was drawing on a battle doctrine that had been refined in the fires of war. That scared the old hunter more than she wanted to admit. Battle doctrines are a product of their time and the situations of the people who create them. The only kind of situation that could create such a doctrine that Zoe could think of would be if ancient Greece had been populated with demigods replacing the mortals. Where were these supposed demigods hiding, and how did they come to be? Not even the horniest of gods could father that many half-bloods. That had been proven back during the fall of the Western Roman Empire, when some gods such as Zeus and Apollo literally had contests to see who could fuck the most prostitutes in a day. Artemis looked at her lieutenant and sighed as she looked at Zoe's confusion and concern. It was obvious to her that Zoe's confusion was over what she had seen during the Capture the Flag game. In all honesty, what she had seen frightened Artemis a bit too. At least she had the comfort of knowing that it was almost impossible for something to go to or come from the shinobi world. However, another part of Artemis was proud of what she had seen. She might not have completely made her peace with having to marry Naruto, but she was at peace with the kind of man he was. He was kind, friendly, determined, loyal, and clever. The goddess turned to Zoe and said, "Why don't you align the hunt against Naruto in the upcoming game? I know that you and the rest of the girls want to challenge Naruto because of what must be. It would offer you all a chance to vent some frustration in a healthy manner. Besides, with all of the changes Naruto is introducing into the campers game, it might be interesting for you all again." Zoe smiled and said, "I'll think about it, Lady Artemis. It would be some fun putting that boy in his proper place." The next week after the third Capture the Flag game, the hunters walked out of the woods covered in cream pies, hot pink paint, perfume, and mud. Their pride was still in the woods, crying over the humiliating defeat Naruto had just handed them. He had defeated them with just the Apollo, Aphrodite, and Hermes cabins on his side. Just how the hell had the blue team set all of those blasted traps before Chiron started the game? Most of the hunters also wanted to know how Naruto had moved so fast throughout the battlefield. Zoe knew something was fishy about Naruto's appearances all over the battlefield. Trails don't suddenly end with the prey vanishing into thin air, especially when a hunter is hot on the chase and the person just disappears from sight for a second. It also bugged Zoe, because some of Naruto's sightings by her hunters were at the same time at different parts of the battlefield. That didn't make any sense to her at all. However, as confused as the hunters were, they had to admit that Naruto had soundly beaten them. The fact that their compatriots on the red team were also decked out in pranked outfits was a small consolation to them. That consolation vanished for the hunters when they saw Artemis walking towards them, and they all lowered their heads in shame. They hadn't lost to a camper in Capture the Flag since the 1200s. Artemis didn't comment on her hunter's state since she didn't want them to feel more embarrassed than they were already feeling. Instead, Artemis gave Zoe a small nod of recognition, and then walked over to the blue team. The more excited members of the team immediately quieted down as they were afraid of earning Artemis's wrath because of the hunter's recent humiliation. Naturally, Naruto was the only one who wasn't worried about Artemis's ire. The hunters had lost the game fair and square, so there should be no problems, right? Unlike the blue team's leader, the other half-bloods were a lot more worried about Artemis's reaction. Sure, she had been friendlier to half-bloods than popular perception had held, but this was the humiliation of something she held dear to her. Deities were not the most understanding of beings when something they liked was attacked or made into a mockery. Goddesses in particular were well noted for wanting to get even. The members of the blue team started to part so that Artemis could walk towards Naruto without breaking her stride. She stopped just a foot in front of young shinobi and said, "Follow me, Naruto. I want to have a talk with you." Naruto nodded his head and followed after Artemis, oblivious to the worried looks his friends were sending him. The duo quickly walked back into the forest until they came to the same spot that Artemis and Hera had briefly talked to each other less than 2 weeks ago. While Hera had appeared twice more in the camp since then for her weekly visit with Naruto and her half-blood relatives, Artemis had made an effort to avoid Hera during those visits. Artemis leaned against one of the tree trunks and asked, "Why did you set those traps for my hunters?" In response to that question, Naruto folded his arms across his chest and tilted his head in confusion. "What do you mean, Artemis? Haven't traps normally been part of Capture the Flag?" Artemis raised an eyebrow in surprise and then clarified. "Traps are common in Capture the Flag, even though they've declined in popularity this past decade or so for the campers. What isn't common is for the traps to be loaded with cream pies, paint buckets, perfume, and other means to humiliate those trapped in the traps." Instantly, Naruto's eyes widened in realization. "I understand now what you're asking about. In all honesty, the reason I had my team set those traps was I didn't see any other way to use legal traps to help my side. With all those years of experience, your hunters have any trap that didn't kill or maim would not have been effective in stopping them. That's especially true since most of the campers don't have the first clue about how to build a decent trap." A look of disbelief appeared on Artemis's face. On the one hand, she was pleased that Naruto recognized her hunter's skill. Far too many half-bloods blamed their defeats at the hunt's hands on their allies' mistakes instead of acknowledging the hunt's superior skill. But on the other hand, she didn't see why Naruto would have to bring in the kinds of attacks he did. "And this leads you to using the kind of traps you did? Why?" A fox-like grin appeared on Naruto's face. "It's very simple, Artemis. The amount of skill someone can use in battle is proportional to how level-headed they are in a situation. I wanted to bring the hunter's skills down to a point where they'd be equal to the average skills of my teammates. In order to do that, I had to piss them off to the point that they'd be in a blind rage. Given how quickly they lost their cool, I'd say that my traps achieved their goal. Hope that doesn't offend you, Artemis, but it is just a game." Part of Artemis was offended at what Naruto had done. She had been rubbing the hunt's winning streak in the other Olympians' faces for centuries. It had been a source of pride to her that the hunters were more skilled, trained, and disciplined than any camper. Part of her was downright enraged to lose that to a punk preteen, even if said preteen had nearly a decade and a half of war training. However, another part of Artemis was thrilled at the challenge Naruto was giving her hunters. As the goddess of the hunt, Artemis had a love for challenges. Few things could really get the blood pumping like hunting a powerful and dangerous beast. Unfortunately for Artemis, she had already hunted every animal and monster on the earth, so a part of the thrill was lost with her favorite hobby. There simply isn't as much challenge in doing something that you've already done before. She hadn't had a challenge like this since the age of exploration, when whole new continents full of unknown prey were open for her to hunt. Naruto was full of surprises, and she knew from observing his night training that he hadn't unleashed a tenth of the tactics and tricks at his disposal. His sportsmanship was also a bit endearing to the goddess, as she knew most other campers present or past would have been trying to rub the recent victory in her hunters' faces. That old and half-forgotten rush came back to Artemis as she looked at Naruto. A small smirk appeared on her face as she spoke. "It doesn't offend me that you've made the game interesting again. That just makes my hunter's future victories all the sweeter. Luke Castellan watched as Naruto and Artemis returned from the woods talking with each other like old friends. As soon as Artemis left Naruto's side, most of the blue team rushed over to lift Naruto in victory. Luke looked down at the captured red flag and felt anger burn in his chest. Part of the 17-year-old was annoyed that everyone was praising Naruto, as if the kid had done all of the work in the game. He was the one who captured the flag and got it safely across the river. Yes, Naruto deserved some praise for planning their victory, but he was the one to achieve it. The fact that Naruto and Artemis were being so friendly towards each other also rubbed Luke the wrong way. Luke remembered the cool disregard that the goddess had held for him when he, Talia, and Annabeth encountered the hunt all those years ago. She hadn't cared at all what might have happened to him when he left the hunt's camp. All she cared about back then was getting Talia and Annabeth to be her servants. Now she was all friendly with Naruto? That had to be a con of some sort given that bet she made with Aphrodite. As the campers moved to their dinner tables, Luke couldn't help but think about how unfair and wrong everything was. It was almost sickening how much the gods played favorites. How many half-bloods had he met over the years that died because they never made it to camp? How many campers were never claimed by their irresponsible parents who couldn't even bother to recognize that they had kids? Why wasn't his cabin given the most supplies, since it did have the greatest number of residents? It wasn't fair and it wasn't right. The injustice in the Olympian system had Naruto as a perfect example. He didn't have to suffer any hardships to get to camp. Hera had given him to the care of a half-blood who had made it in the world, and who had then sent him on a safe trip to camp. What's more, Naruto had been claimed the instant he came to camp half-blood, and got a cabin to himself which Hera had personalized for him. Why should he get the royal treatment to Easy Street while others had to sweat blood to get half as much? How come Hera could come to camp every week to see her son, but his father couldn't be bothered to visit camp? Luke's anger at the injustice of camp blinded him to some very important details. The most important detail was that Cabin 11 had been receiving an influx of new supplies such as towels, toiletries, and new camping bags. Luke had merely written those supplies off as his siblings getting better at raiding the camp storehouse. However, the truth was that Naruto was using his rights as cabin counselor to transfer Cabin 2's excess allotment of supplies to Cabin 11. They weren't doing him any good, so why should he hang on to them? Dinner was an excellent meal as always, and the former Red Team members were soon in good spirits as well. Cabin 8 quickly regained its usual boisterous atmosphere once Artemis passed along why Naruto had set the traps he did and promised them additional training. Luke's anger had quelled under the private congratulations of his cabin mates. The only one who wasn't in a jovial mood was Naruto, because he was once again eating alone. He was happy that his side had once again won, but the unintended isolation at mealtimes just ate at the shinobi half-blood. Towards the end of dinner, a bell rang in the big house, catching everyone's attention. Chiron immediately got up and started to walk to the big house, while almost all of the tables quieted down. The only ones who spoke were the junior members of the hunt who wanted to know what was going on. Naruto enhanced his hearing as best he could and listened in as Artemis started to speak. The campers are about to find out who among them will get to lead a quest this year. Every year one Olympian gets to pick a champion and give them a task to perform for a great honor. We usually issue this quest a week or two after the summer session starts, but no later than the end of the first month. This year it is Hermes' chance to pick a champion. The campers are waiting to find out who will be chosen, since this yearly quest is the only quest that will be issued to a half-blood unless an emergency comes up. Naruto sent a silent prayer of thanks to Taichi that the rest of the campers were keeping silent. He had been told that a yearly quest had been instituted for camp since the 50s, but he hadn't been told anything about how it worked. Naruto also gave a quiet thanks to Artemis for explaining things to her hunters so he could also learn. Artemis raised an eyebrow slightly and glanced over to Naruto for a second after hearing his prayer. Caroline then asked, "Do you give out quests as well, Lady Artemis?" That question caused most of the hunters to look at their mistress in curiosity. Artemis nodded her head and replied, I give out quests as well when it is my turn to pick a champion. Most of the time I'll pick a young maiden as my champion, especially if there is a former candidate for the hunt who did not accept my offer to join us for respectable reasons. Last time it was my turn, I changed things a bit by choosing one of my more humble nephews instead. There was a ring of sex slavers going after nymphs that I wanted shut down, and I didn't want to risk my champion to the same fate. Thankfully, he and his team were able to accomplish their quest and free the nymphs before most were violated. Things became quiet on the pavilion after Artemis finished her explanation as everyone waited for Chiron to return. Minutes later, even though it seemed like hours to most campers, Chiron returned from the big house with a smile on his face. He trotted to the head table, and then turned around to look at his students. Everyone, I have good news. This year's champion and quest has been decided. Will Luke Castellan, son of Lord Hermes, please come here? A round of applause broke out at Cabin 11's table as Luke stood up with shock all over his face. Luke saw the smiling faces of his cheering friends, and then walked over to Chiron. The ageless trainer placed a hand on Luke's shoulder and said, Lord Hermes has given Luke a formidable task, but one both he and I know Luke can accomplish. He has been tasked to journey to the Garden of the Hesperides and retrieve a golden apple from the garden. This is a quest which has not been successfully completed since Marco Polo, son of Nike, completed this quest in 1296. Chiron then turned to Luke and said, Since you are the champion of the quest, you are excused from camp activities tomorrow. I recommend that you ask the oracle about the quest in the morning, so that you can have some time to think about its advice. Think about what you are told very carefully and wisely pick your companions. I have full confidence in your success, my boy, but one can always fail if they don't think things through. Chapter 11. Most of the campers were energized once Luke had been given his quest. Almost all of the adventurous half-bloods were hoping that Luke would pick them to go along with him on the quest. In fact, the teen had a small throng of would-be companions follow him to the big house, so that he could visit the oracle. Zoe was understandably in a foul mood ever since Chiron revealed that the quest was to repeat Hercules' 11th labor. All of the hunters gave her some space to try and cool down, knowing that Zoe always got upset whenever this particular quest was issued. Even Artemis preferred to let her oldest friend have some space when she got into one of these moods. The campers knew that something was wrong with Zoe this morning, so they stepped even lighter around her than normal. Apparently, Naruto was the only person in Camp Half-Blood who did not get the memo to leave Zoe alone. He spotted her angrily pacing behind cabin 8 from his perch on top of his cabin. The reason why Naruto was up on the roof of cabin 2 was because he wanted to test his ability to discreetly climb without using chakra. As soon as Naruto noticed how bad Zoe's mood was, he jumped down to the ground and started walking towards Zoe. Just as Naruto approached cabin 6, Zoe whirled around and verbally assaulted him. What are you doing here, Uzumaki? Shouldn't you be in that pack of fools that wish to be part of the quest? Naruto's eyes narrowed and he quickly shot back, that tree belongs to my mother. Why by Tartarus would I want to steal an apple from it? My mother has done everything in her power to care for me while still obeying the laws. Now I don't know about you, but in my book stealing from my mother after everything she's done for me would make me lower than shit. Zoe was taken aback by the force of Naruto's reply. She was just about to retaliate when Naruto's words sunk into her head. She quickly realized that out of all the people in camp he would be the only other person to have negative feelings over Luke's quest. Zoe took a few deep breaths to regain control of her temper and then spoke. I suppose you would have a reason to not wish to be on this quest. But my other question remains. Why are you here talking to me, Uzumaki? Naruto raised an eyebrow and quickly replied, You're upset about something, and I want to try and help you get back to your usual self. Very quickly Zoe replied, There's nothing you can do to help me. Almost instantly Naruto replied, That's not true. I could listen to you talk about what is bothering you. Perhaps I can offer you some advice or point out something you might have overlooked. Zoe gave Naruto a vicious glare, trying to force him to run away. To her surprise, Naruto took her glare head-on and wasn't affected by it at all. That fact ever so slightly raised her minute respect for him. Eventually, Zoe was forced to look away from Naruto and directed her gaze to the ground. You couldn't possibly comprehend what my troubles are, boy. These troubles wouldn't happen to have something to do with the recently issued quest, would they? Zoe's head snapped up when she heard Naruto say that. A small smirk appeared on his face, and he continued. Last night after my training I broke into Chiron's records of quests, and I found out something interesting. The quest to retrieve a golden apple from the Garden of the Hesperides has been issued 450 times, but it has only been successfully completed by Heracles and Marco Polo. Under Marco Polo's entry he makes mention that he was only able to complete his quest by gaining the advice of a nymph named Zoe Nightshade. Furthermore, he mentions that the reason he traveled to China was to capture a pair of qilin as the nymph's price for her aid. A small smile appeared on Zoe's face as she thought about the mythical beasts from the Far East that Marco had given her all those centuries ago. My lady found them to be most enjoyable sport. Naruto smiled and said, so I take it that it's safe to say that you're the X factor that enabled Heracles and Marco Polo to succeed where others failed. Zoe guardedly replied, I suppose that such could be said of me, but that is all I will say on the subject. That's fine, Zoe. Just remember that I will be here if you need someone to talk about this situation. With that said, Naruto walked away from Zoe after giving her one last smile. To Zoe's surprise, she found herself feeling better about that quest being brought up again after talking with Naruto than before. Perhaps it was due to her finding out that Marco Polo had acknowledged her help, unlike that man. 20 days later, Luke dragged himself back into camp with a field bandage covering the left side of his face, and the rest of his body covered in bruises. One of the nearby dryads spotted Luke, picked him up, and started to carry him into camp. As the dryad brought Luke towards the big house, several half-bloods spotted Luke and cried out in shock. Their cries quickly grabbed more campers' attention, quickly resulting in a stampede of half-bloods towards the big house. Only Kages 8 and Naruto were not caught up in the stampede of worried half-bloods. They were all focused on a game of Go between Artemis and Naruto. Artemis had challenged Naruto to a board game of his choice to do something different, as she told him. In reality, Artemis was trying to get Naruto to see her as a friend instead of as a friendly teacher. It was step one in her plan to get him as her husband. She had been a bit surprised when Naruto suggested Go, and she was only vaguely familiar with the game. Tartarus, she wouldn't have even heard of the game if Apollo hadn't gone to Japan in the 1940s and had his craze for Oriental culture. The seemingly simple game was challenging Artemis, and she found the challenge to be exciting. Being in the middle of a contest also made it easier to talk with Naruto, because she could focus on the contest instead of why she was talking with him. The commotion in camp pulled the duo's attention away from their game, and made them look at the big house. Naruto frowned since there was a worried and concerned note in the commotion, instead of the cheering that should be there if the quest was successful. Naruto turned to look at Artemis and said, Luke failed his quest, didn't he? Artemis frowned and nodded her head. We all knew that he would fail that quest since he didn't ask for the proper help or do the necessary research on his quest. Artemis's frown got harder. She briefly read Luke's mind. Foolish boy, he was so focused on his stupid pride being wounded over doing a quest that someone else had already done that he caused his companions to die from carelessness. Hermes will have a lot to answer for to the council over making such a gross mismatch of quest and champion. Demeter and Athena will see to that. Naruto looked down at his lap in shame. He knew that Luke had misinterpreted the oracle's prophecy when he picked one of Demeter's children as a companion for the quest. The line success or failure rests with the gardener's aid was referring to Zoe, and not a member of Cabin 4. Before Luke left, Naruto had tried to tell Luke that he was making a mistake, but the older camper had brushed him off. Perhaps he should have kidnapped the young man and forced him to read the facts facts of the quest. Not that Naruto wanted the quest to succeed since Luke was supposed to steal from his mother, but he didn't want anyone to die either. Zoe also winced when Artemis stated that Luke's companions were dead. She might have been annoyed with those two boys because they were too proud for their meager accomplishments. However, that didn't mean she wanted them to die on this quest. She had hoped that they'd just be roughed up a bit and become a little less insufferable. A quick glance at Naruto told Zoe that Naruto was feeling just as guilty if not more so about the results of the quest than she was. Reading her lieutenant's mind told Artemis all she needed to know about the situation for Zoe and Naruto. She looked up at each of them and then said, "Neither of you two is to blame for this disaster. It rests with Hermes and his son alone. Hermes should have known better than to give a quest that has misunderstood details popularly known. Luke should have properly researched his quest and kept his ego in check. The fact that he dismissed the advice of allies thinking that they were after a piece of glory removes any pity for his poor choices." Suddenly, the entire camp was filled with the sound of a bellowing bull. Artemis looked over at her hunters and noticed their startled and uneasy looks. They were still surprised with how Hera called all the gods to a council. Ever since power in Olympus shifted to Hera, the traditional crackle of thunder had stopped being used. The half-blood campers were startled by the bellow, but were not nearly as uneasy about it as the longer-lived residents of camp. Not surprising since every half-blood in camp arrived after Hera strong-armed Zeus into a figurehead role. Artemis gave Naruto a small smile and said, "I have to go and likely deal with the fallout of this quest, so I will have to concede this game to you. Perhaps we can play it again, Naruto?" Naruto nodded his head and replied, "That would be great, Artemis. I look forward to our rematch." Hera scowled as she looked at Hermes with fury in her eyes. She noted as Dionysus finally walked into the council room looking like a deadbeat drunk. It was insulting that it took him 10 minutes to get to the council room while Artemis was seated in just over a minute. Once Dionysus sat down, she stood up to speak. "We are all here to discuss the disaster of a quest that was recently issued. Athena, read your findings." Athena stood up from her throne with her face an almost demonic mix of rage and grief. Charlie had been her wisest and most brilliant child in centuries. The fact that he was more of a scholar than a warrior had been the only reason she hadn't selected him for a certain quest. He had only agreed to join Luke on that accursed quest because he knew Luke needed someone with wisdom and cunning to help him on the quest. Now instead of preparing to watch him get his masters, she had been preparing to bury him. She was going to make damn sure her son got the justice he deserved. Somehow Athena was able to calm herself down into a cold fury as she pulled out a scroll and began to read from it. "It is my finding that Hermes has demonstrated criminal negligence in both selecting a quest for his challenge this cycle and in choosing a champion to complete the quest. The findings are as follows. In selecting a quest, Hermes broke two of the principal rules associated with the council's edict regarding the selection of quests. The first rule broken was the rule of association. Hermes has had no connection to the Garden of the Hesperides from the heroic age, or by significant request for aid by half-bloods attempting to complete a quest associated with the garden. The second rule broken was selecting one of the proscribed quests as his quest for the year. Hera shot Hermes a sub-zero glare to reinforce Athena's point. As part of the agreement to have yearly quests, each of the Olympians had been able to claim one quest as off-limits for one reason or another. Hera had put the quest for the golden apples on the proscribed list because she was tired of half-bloods trying to steal an apple from her tree. It was one of the few good things she had gotten out of her marriage to Zeus. Athena continued to read from her findings, so she could get her pound of flesh from Hermes. In choosing a champion, Hermes demonstrated negligence on the following points. In terms of physical abilities, the half-blood Luke Castellan barely qualifies for high-risk quests. While he is first in terms of physical condition among his siblings, he is third in rank among the campers staying in cabin 11 and 15th in rank among the campers excluding the hunters. His half-blood heritage gifts are good all around, but not exceptional among his siblings in recent decades. Currently he has 15 living siblings, 2 who are in camp, who are significantly better than him in their stealing abilities, which is paramount for a quest like he was assigned. The only skill in which Castellan has demonstrated significant advantage over his siblings and other half-bloods in general is swordsmanship. A vital skill to be sure, but it is not particularly noteworthy for his assigned quest. In addition to a poor physical match for the position of champion, Castellan repeatedly demonstrated even worse mental preparedness for the quest. Not once did he investigate why Chiron mentioned Marco Polo. Further investigation on my part has revealed that Chiron gave his hint because he never received notification that the edict sealing certain details of the 11th labor has been rescinded. On a side note, investigation on that matter has been started. Castellan also rejected attempts by his fellow campers to inform him about certain details concerning his quest in the belief that said campers were trying to steal some of the quest's prestige. During the quest, Castellan devoted most of his mental energies towards private complaining that his quest had already been accomplished by another hero instead of receiving a new quest. Furthermore, he demonstrated poor judgment by insisting that his party continue the quest after Patricia Rose was grievously wounded outside of Albuquerque, using up most of their medical supplies to get her mobile. Patricia's weakened condition and the lack of medical supplies was the deciding factors in the conflicts that led to Castellan's companion's demise. All of the gods and goddesses then turned their gaze to look at Hermes, who was cringing. Hera then said, as a matter of procedure, "Do you have anything to say in light of these charges, Hermes?" Hermes wisely kept his mouth shut, as Hera had drastically changed Olympus's investigation and court proceedings. Hera cut more bull out of the old proceedings than even Athena knew had existed. Long and eloquent speeches that used to get so many deities off by boring the council were prohibited. Only the facts could be presented, and facts painted a very bad picture for Hermes. There was a minute of pause as everyone waited for anyone to speak up in defense of Hermes. Finally, Hera broke the silence by speaking. "The edict is quite clear on its agreed-upon punishments. Hermes is to forfeit half of his favor reserves for breaking the rule of association. The quests are suspended for 6 years, and Hermes is to be excluded from selecting a quest or champion for the next 12 cycles when the yearly quests resume for selecting a proscribed quest. This council must now move on to determining what action, if any, is to be done to Luke Castellan for his performance on the quest." Aphrodite pouted and said, "Do we really have to do anything? I don't recall any rules saying that half-bloods must, or even that they can be punished for failing to do a quest. Besides, the wounds poor Luke suffered will leave him scared in such a way that it will undoubtedly mar his good looks instead of enhancing them. That's got to be punishment enough." Demeter turned to Athena and gave the goddess a questioning glance. Athena frowned for a second as she remembered that there was no law allowing gods to punish demigods who failed quests. In fact, there was a law which prevented it. She'd have to get creative if she was to gain even part of her vengeance against the boy. No one caused her children to die and got away with it. An almost bloodthirsty smile appeared on Athena's face as she figured out a way to at least partially attack Luke. Aphrodite is correct. There is in fact a law that protects half-bloods from retributive action because of a god being upset that a quest was not completed. However, that law only provides protection for a half-blood who fails a quest. It does not give them blanket protection for any misdeeds they performed on the quest. Castellan directly caused the death of his companions because of negligence, and for that justice demands he be punished. Poseidon quickly cut in, "Justice, or your vengeance for a dead son, Athena? Hindsight is 20/20, as the mortals say. A decision that looks good to a rookie during the heat of battle often isn't the best choice that could be made, but it is the best that they can make at that time." Almost immediately Athena shot back, "Castellan was no rookie to fighting monsters. No half-blood child who has survived on their own for several years against monsters can claim that title. This was willful neglect by a seasoned fighter, and the boy should face the consequences of his actions." "Enough!" Hera called out in a booming voice to get all of the deities' attention. These proceedings are not to be bogged down with philosophical debate. The fact is that 2 demigods under Luke Castellan's command died during his quest. We will now vote whether or not he needs to be punished for this. If he is to be punished, we will then decide what his punishment is to be. Let the voting commence now. The rest of summer passed faster than Naruto expected, and before he knew it he was celebrating the last day of the summer session with the traditional banquet. To Naruto's surprise and great fortune, Hera had arranged for her weekly visit to be during the banquet so that they could have dinner together. One could almost imagine that Naruto and swapped places with Apollo because of how bright his smile was over having dinner with his mother. Around Naruto's neck was his necklace with a single bead. On the bead there was the picture of a girl shooting a bow. Naruto had pushed and got the other campers to agree that having a goddess join camp as the archery teacher was the most momentous event during the summer session. It was at least better than having the bead commemorate the disastrous summer quest. Luke's quest had become a taboo subject in Camp Half-Blood when Artemis and Dionysus had returned from the council session a little over a month ago. They informed the campers that the yearly quests would be suspended until further notice. Chris Rodriguez was quietly promoted to counselor of Cabin 11, and the temporary swordsmanship trainer, who had been filling in during the quest, was given the position permanently. Most of the Olympian Council felt that removing Luke from positions of authority in camp was the best way to handle his inability to be a leader. Hera smiled at Naruto, proud at how well he had done for his first summer at camp. Part of her wished that he had chosen to become a year-round camper. However, she could respect that he was returning to Alaska so that he could be with his mortal friends. It would also give him greater opportunity to train his shinobi abilities. The night training once a week kept Naruto's skills up and improved them slowly, but it didn't give him the edge that Hera knew he'd need one day. She had sent Tsunade a dream to request permission for Naruto to teach the shinobi arts to the campers. Without Tsunade's permission, Hera knew that Naruto would refuse to teach any half-blood even if she and all of the Olympians ordered him to do so. That loyalty filled the goddess's heart with pride, since a man should keep his word. If she had judged the time shifts correctly, Tsunade should be able to give her a response sometime in January or February, since Hera had set up the dream message to start again when Tsunade next went to bed. Naruto ended Hera's musing by holding a plate near her and saying, "Baklava, Mom?" Hera blinked her eyes in surprise before she happily took a few pieces for dessert. Once Hera had her dessert, Naruto placed a few pieces on his plate and returned the plate with the remaining baklava to the dessert table. As soon as Naruto returned to the table, he attacked his dessert with as much gusto as table manners allowed. Baklava had quickly become his favorite dessert since he came to Earth. Chiron soon announced that campfire songs would start in a few minutes after everyone had a chance to wash their hands. Hera smiled at Naruto and said, "Sadly, it's time for me to leave again, Naruto. I love you." Almost immediately, Naruto pulled Hera into a hug and replied, "I love you too, Mom. I can't wait to see you again next week." Hera kissed Naruto on his forehead and then disappeared in a cloud of leaves. Some of the campers sent Naruto jealous glares that he again got to spend time with his mother. Sure, Hera had quickly become one of the more popular goddess in camp since she often joined in the camp games, but they wanted to spend time with their divine parents as well. At least she often would pass along messages from the gods and goddesses to their kids. Those messages made the campers feel a lot better. The campfire sing-along lasted its usual length of time. Naruto still wasn't too thrilled about singing. However, his annoyance at singing didn't dampen his joy at spending time with friends and family. Once the sing-along was over, Naruto got up and headed to his cabin. Along the way he would occasionally wave to a camper or two, and once he even waved to a hunter as he made his way to cabin 2. The hunters were still guarded around everyone else in camp, but they had warmed up a good deal as long as someone didn't try to get fresh. Naruto had noticed that many hunters kept their eyes on him as if evaluating him for something. Probably for that mysterious task that Artemis was eventually going to want him to do. Once inside his cabin, Naruto quickly sealed away his luggage for the trip back to Alaska in the morning. He then turned off the lights and hopped into bed, hoping that Morpheus wouldn't send him dreams that were too bizarre. Now in the 7th grade, Naruto was embarking on his most perilous task yet, a field trip to the state capital of Juneau. For most middle school students, the 2-day field trip was party time. It was a chance for them to have time with their friends away from their folks. However, it was a totally different story for Naruto, since he had passed the absolute limits of Olympus's influence an hour ago. He was completely on his own and couldn't even hope that a prayer would be answered, as it was likely that the Olympians wouldn't even be able to hear a prayer from his current location. Every bump on the road had Naruto ready to bring out his lucky bat, as he kept his kanabo in hand's reach at all times. What really put Naruto on edge at the moment was the fact that the bus was driving along a coastal mountain road with a lot of trees on the mountain. Everything about this stretch of road screamed prime ambush area to the shinobi. Arnold looked at his friend and said, "Hey Naruto. How was your weekly Skype game with your friend from that summer camp?" Naruto sighed and replied, "I still haven't won a single game of chess. Luckily, we'll be starting to play Go next time, so I have a good chance of winning that game. Artemis isn't nearly as familiar with Go as she is with chess." Artemis and Naruto had gotten into the habit of playing strategy games with each other at Camp Half-Blood, and had decided to continue it after the summer session was over. Iris had been very accommodating by letting the duo play a game once a week over Iris Message. The goddess of rainbows thought it was great to have front row seats to observe the maiden goddess trying to court a guy. Arnold nodded his head, still having a bit of trouble wrapping his mind about the real world that Naruto had introduced him into. Over the summer, while Naruto was away, Arnold had become acquainted with some of the local spirits who lived around town. Many of them had been amused to spend time with a clear-sighted mortal. Arianwen, the dryad of a white oak in the town park, had been especially friendly to Arnold, much to his confusion and later Naruto's amusement. The semi-jovial atmosphere between the two friends ended when they heard the sound of a tree falling. Instantly, the bus driver slammed on the brakes, but he was unable to prevent the bus from hitting the downed tree. Naruto used his chakra to lock himself into his seat while grabbing Arnold and his kanabo. Many of the students were thrown around their seats and several fell onto the floor. As soon as the bus stopped moving, Naruto looked around to check out the state of his fellow students. Almost everyone had bruises, but there were no serious injuries. Just as Naruto finished looking at everyone, one of the girls screamed out, "Oh my God! There are grizzly bears approaching us." Everyone turned to look at the bears approaching the bus. While many students started to scream, both Naruto and Arnold frowned as they saw what was really lumbering towards them. Half a dozen 11 feet tall men wearing suits of fur and mail lumbered down the mountain towards the bus. All of them were armed with wicked-looking battle axes that were dripping with fresh blood. Naruto and Arnold turned to look at each other, and Arnold sighed, "Can't we ever have a normal field trip?" Naruto chuckled as he punched out the window he was sitting next to on the bus. "With me on the bus, no way, Arnold." Naruto quickly jumped through the window and hit the pavement running. Some of the giants spotted his movement and turned their heads to look at the shinobi. Naruto firmly held his kanabo in his left hand while forming a Rasengan in his right. He then let loose a wave of killing intent to get the giants' attention. All 6 giants turned to look at Naruto and growled. The lead giant called out, "Get the aunt's child. Whosoever brings me his skull can spare one of the women for company tonight." 3 of the giants immediately roared out in joy as they rushed towards Naruto at speeds faster than a sprinting deer. One of them immediately tried to split Naruto in half with his axe. The axe missed by a hair and dug a gash into the road before the giant pulled the axe out without breaking his swing. Naruto blocked the swing from the next giant with his Rasengan, creating a sonic boom from clash of the weapon and attack. Part of Naruto was shocked that his attack didn't break the axe, but he kept calm and slammed his kanabo into the shaft of the axe. Naruto's weapon smashed through the wood of the axe to the giant's astonishment. He quickly followed up by planting the kanabo on the road and jumping up to deliver a mule kick to the giant's face. The third giant tried to chop Naruto down his waist while he was in midair. Naruto was able to twist out of lethal range of the attack, but the blade of the axe still scraped his back, drawing blood. Naruto landed on the ground and quickly started to run to better ground. As he was running, the giant who had successfully hit him used his finger to pick up some of Naruto's blood from the axe and tasted it. The giant frowned and muttered, "Something isn't right about this once. His blood tastes of the Vanir, but there's something new and foul partially covering the taste." One of the giants shot back, "Who cares if the once tastes foul? We haven't seen any once in years, and even a foul-tasting one would be a delicacy. Besides, the men children in that bus will be enough food for all of us." Naruto quickly summoned a dozen clones, and together all of the Narutos used the Shuriken Shadow Clone technique on Shuriken with explosive seals in the center. The cloud of metal death quickly hit the three giants and tore the road to shreds. Naruto jumped a few feet to the side just in case and created a dozen more clones to try and save his fellow students from the giants attacking the bus. Naruto's fears were confirmed when two axes flew out the smoke and killed three of his shadow clones. The smoke quickly cleared enough for Naruto to see the three giants. Their arms and faces were covered in bloody cuts, and the furs on their outfits were torn to shreds. However, their male suits were in perfect condition. The barely teenage shinobi threw exploding cards at all six giants and started calling them names to get all of them to focus on him. As he did this, he tried to think of a way to deal with the current situation. Using the Kyuubi's chakra seemed like the best solution to take these monsters down, but he had his fellow students to think about. That chakra was way too dangerous to use around civilians, especially when he was trying to protect the civilians. He also had to avoid bringing the forest down, or even worse, triggering an avalanche. Another headache for Naruto was the fact that the giants weren't about to leave the bus alone. Twice he tried to draw them away, only for some of the giants deciding to head back to the bus. Nimbly the shinobi dodged another axe swing and slammed his kanabo into the giant's chest. The giant was literally forced a foot back from Naruto due to the force of the impact. However, the giant merely grunted and continued to attack. Was it the giant's armor that was protecting them, or were they somehow immune to the effects of celestial bronze? Naruto swerved away from a kick, and then slammed his down on the exposed knee. The giant howled in rage as his knee broke and twisted in an unnatural manner. However, the wounded giant was able to get some payback by punching Naruto in the back where he had been cut. The punch sent the shinobi flying towards the guard rail, which Naruto broke through at the cost of 2 ribs. As Naruto fell towards the ocean below, he felt true fear for the second time in his life. How was he going to save everyone in this condition? A pair of strong arms caught Naruto just before hitting the ocean waves. Naruto blinked his eyes in shock as a breathtakingly beautiful woman with fiery red hair held him close. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto could see that his savior was riding a golden motorcycle that was flying in the air towards the bus. The woman smiled and said, "Rest brave once. You battled well against so many Jotun for one who has so recently entered the northern realm. But now you must rest, for I do not think it is your time to enter Valhalla or Folkvanger." Trying to keep conscious, Naruto whispered, "Please save them." He was barely able to finish his request because of the pain. The goddess smiled and said, "Do not worry, child. Isuna, goddess of the sun, will see to your companion's deliverance from the Jotun this day." That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.